your source for everything paranormal. Parax.
Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to Channeling History. We're the only show where we speak to the souls that made things happen. I'm Barry Strohm, your host. I'll be speaking with the words of the spirit guest tonight. And tonight we're going to have a follow-up to our last week's show.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host, and I would also like to welcome you to our show. Last week we interviewed the spirits of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Antonin Scalia. They spoke of federalism and gave their opinions of what is taking place in our modern government. We only got through half of our questions, so we're going to continue the roundtable discussion this week. In addition to Channeling History, we do 3 other podcasts: Hello Heaven on Friday nights, a weekly message from Jesus on Wednesday mornings, and a Sunday sermon. All of our Channeling History shows are available on our YouTube channel and podbean.com. The YouTube channel is in the name of Barry Strohm, and we have over 650 videos at this time. This week, we're going to continue our deep dive into the history, so let's get on with our very excellent guests.
Okay, we're definitely going to have a wide variety of opinions tonight, so we'll give a short disclaimer. The opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits, do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the Parax Network or of our sponsors. Now, before we channel, we always say a prayer of protection, so Connie's going to say the prayer, and we will then begin to channel with our spirit guests.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God. Amen.
Okay, so I want to leave as much time as possible for our 3 guests because we're going to continue our conversation with Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Antonin Scalia. We're going to try to start where we left over from last week. So, Connie, let's begin.
Okay, would each of you like to begin with a message? Let's begin with President Madison.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. It seems like there's so much happening in the United States right now. We're watching from the other side, and we're seeing so much turmoil going on in the political system. I never thought that I would live to see what is taking place, but apparently it's live and learn. I thank you for allowing us to come back again, and I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions. So I know that President Jefferson is here, and he has a small message as well. Yes, good evening to all, and thank you as well for allowing us to speak once more. There are amazing things taking place in the United States right now, things that I never anticipated. I never realized when we formulated a 2-party system just how much it would have an effect on everybody's human lives. You are certainly living in a time of turmoil, and I hope that we are going to be able to maybe give you some advice on how you personally can get through it better. There is so much going on today that it is very difficult to cover all of the subjects, but we will try. Justice Scalia? Well, I'm sure many of you know what my thoughts are concerning a bunch of the things taking place. This is what happens when you draw away from the Constitution. This is what happens when you draw away from a common sense approach to government. This is what happens when you mislead, when you lie to people. I hope that many of the people in government learn their lesson from all that is taking place. But I also hope that the voters can see through what is causing the problems and will elect individuals that will assure that their best wishes is taking place. So thank you as well for allowing me to return. And Connie, we're ready for your questions.
Okay. In modern dollar equivalents, the Revolutionary cost approximately $2.4 billion, or approximately $800 per citizen. There were a little over 3 million citizens at the time. Our current national debt is almost $35 trillion, or $103,700 per citizen. Would each of you please comment on our current national debt?
President Madison, I must say I'm truly astonished by these numbers. I knew that it was bad, but I never realized just how bad it was until I heard what Connie just said. I cannot comprehend a situation where each citizen would have over $100,000 worth of national debt. We thought it was bad after the Revolutionary War. We had no means of taxation, essentially. We knew we had to make changes. But to us, $800 per citizen was a huge amount. It was unheard of in our time. I'm not sure what has happened to see such a ridiculous amount of national debt. Does everybody forget that you have to pay interest on that national debt? Does everybody forget that the country only has so much income to draw upon? Does anyone in the country realize that this debt has to be repaid? Does anyone realize that in the long run it will destroy the country? I am truly amazed by these questions. Mr. Jefferson, I always felt that if the large cities, which would tend to be more liberal and would draw away from what the thoughts of the country person was allowed to flourish, that it would be very difficult to check some of the policies. This insane spending is taking place from both parties. It wasn't that long ago that you had a balanced budget, that you had a budget that was possible to live with. The insanity has just seemed to take place in the last, 20 years or less? It seems as like there are no controls anymore into what the government does. Do the people care at all about what monies are being spent? Those are your monies. Have you realized that the more that the debt has to be paid back or the interest has to pay it on that the less money is available for policies and practices that should be done for recreating your infrastructure for defense? It is amount of money, this type of debt is nothing but a sinkhole. It just draws the country down deeper and deeper. As the debt grows, so does the interest that you have to pay on it. As the interest grows, there is so much money less for policies. Yet the government still spends as much as it wants on its policies and does not take into consideration the fact that just makes the debt grow more and more. There will be a time that the dollar is shunned by other countries. Debt like this is like quicksand. It draws the country deeper and deeper. It is a spiral. You need politicians that know how to get out of that death spiral. Justice Scalia. I watched as policies were changing as I was on the court. I knew that what was taking place was going to be a disaster. Do you think any of these idiots in government would listen? No. All they wanted to do was spend. As the population grew, we had more and more people in the legislatures. Each one of them wanted to take as much money back to their district as possible. They wanted to just spend without a true understanding of what monies were coming into the coffers. The Constitution laid a foundation, and that provides a pathway to leading a normal life and to having a normal government. Today, government has wandered so far from that original path. They think that rewriting the Constitution is the answer so that they can borrow more money. Well, I can assure you that it's not, especially since we're over here and we can watch what is taking place.
Our political system is in turmoil. President Biden has just withdrawn from the November elections after receiving the majority of the votes in the Democratic primary. What do you see as the political and constitutional implications of this action?
President Jefferson. There are many implications of this. We never, ever considered the fact that a political party would allow someone to run for office that was having physical problems. I think that the main problem is that another candidate should have been chosen. We spoke about the problems with freedom of press. The press no longer is neutral. Freedom of speech no longer exists. And many members of the press were well aware that the candidate was not in physical condition to carry out another 4-year term. There are many, many implications to this. The fact now that the candidate for president will not have been elected by the people is a terrible thing. All the primaries were run according to the Constitution, and the president was nominated to run for another term. Now you will have a candidate running for the president of the United States that will not have gone through the primary process. There are many, many implications that will come out in the future over this that people have not even thought about at this time. President Madison. This is truly not something that we ever considered when we were doing the founding documents. The political process is very carefully laid out. Each state conducts a primary where each party has the opportunity to nominate its candidate for the general election. When that process is bypassed, it is clearly going against the desires that we had when we founded this country. And there are many, many implications. I would hope that once this is sorted out and a president is elected, that all of the citizens of the country will pull behind whatever president is elected. Justice Scalia. Now, you know that I'm going to have a few words to say about this situation. The fact that the public was misled. Many, many people knew that the president was having physical problems. It is very normal for people to have physical problems, but they must also understand that capabilities decrease as age increases. It's only a natural progress. The terrible part of this is that the people have been misled. They've been misled not only by those in the White House, but as President Jefferson said, by the press. The press lied to the people. It was when we established the freedom that the press was to have. It was with the idea that they would discover such situations and make the knowledge available to the people. This is what the Founding Fathers wanted. Another implication that is very interesting. How about those individuals that donated large sums of money for President Biden? That money is now in this huge fund. And what if these people don't want to support whoever the candidate is that comes up? Does the Democratic Party pay those people back? What takes place? As my colleagues have said, there are many, many things and many, many legal implications. I truly wish that I was still on the court so that I could participate in some of the arguments that I know will be coming before them. It is going to be a very, very tumultuous time in the near future for the United States.
Indeed. The Founding Fathers feared political factions would tear our nation apart, and in 1787 entirely omitted political parties from the Constitution. In Federalist 10, it's written that one of the functions of a well-constructed union should be its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. We assume that faction could be modern political parties. What are each of your opinions on our modern political parties, and do you see any hope for them in the future?
President Jefferson. I suppose that I am as much to blame for what is taking place in the political processes of the United States as anyone. John Adams and I had many, many disagreements as to policy. I was more rural in that I lived in the country and thought that the rights of states had to be preserved at all costs. Hamilton, he felt that the government should have the ability to tax, that a central government was what we should be. My colleague here thought federalism was the most important way for the country to move forward. And we came up with a Constitution. President George Washington did not have any political party, and he ruled as such for 8 years. But during his rule, it was becoming apparent that there were huge political differences as to the future of the United States. Today, the political party system is an utter disaster. I am almost sorry that I was so strong in coming up with a political party and founding it. I almost wish that I had never done it. President Madison. I thought that a strong central government was absolutely required, and in many instances, it is truly required. I never contemplated that the political parties would become the be-all and end-all of the political system. We had many disagreements. We argued, and it was very difficult to get the Constitution approved. I wrote the Federalist Papers, or participated in writing them, because I wanted the state of New York to approve the Constitution. It was a very difficult thing. There were many that thought that it should not be approved, that it took away the individual rights of the citizens. Today, the political parties are being, shall we say, run by individuals of great wealth. There are many people that have great powers over the political parties. I felt that the political parties would show off the needs of the individuals that had the same beliefs. Today, political parties have almost become warring factions. It will not be until people understand that they have to act together for the good of the country. They may show their political differences by joining parties and electing candidates, but once the election is over, it is the duty of all citizens to support the will of the majority. That is what makes a country great. Justice Scalia. What is taking place today, there's no other way to say it, it's just simply a disaster. The two parties cannot get together. They don't cooperate. When they pass laws that are ludicrous, and the Supreme Court points this out and disallows them, they blame the Supreme Court. They would never think of blaming themselves. When the president overreaches through executive order and the Supreme Court points out that they are in error and does not allow the executive order to go through, the answer is, well, we'll pack the Supreme Court. We'll put more people of our party on it, more people of our beliefs. This is counter to any concept that can lead to a great country continuing to prosper and move forward. It is only when political parties compromise and cooperate that it will be possible for the government to have any hope for the future. There are many idiots in politics today. There are many people that have no right to be there. There are many people that only are in it for their own personal power and wealth. The people have to understand this, and they have to put up candidates that truly believe that the will and what's best for the country should come first. That is the last thing that you're seeing today. Even with the political appointments on the court today, you're seeing vast differences. Justices have been politicized. The president uses the threat of packing the court in order to influence decisions. This is not what the Founding Fathers thought of. There was supposed to be equality in the three branches of government. I would love to see people get together again. You can have differences of opinion. Fight it out at the ballot box. But once that election is over, understand the will of the majority and support it. Today, minorities are trying to overtake the will of the majority with violence. There is so much taking place today that the Founding Fathers never could have conceived of. But the Constitution that they came up with is an incredible document. If the courts just simply follow the Constitution today, the country will thrive into the future. If the people support the will of the majority, the country will thrive into the future. If the politicians understand that they can't spend all that they want to spend, and that they have to balance the budget, and that they have to be more conservative in where they put the money, then the country will thrive into the future. It's not that difficult.
The Founding Fathers approved the concept of 3 equal branches of government that would act as checks and balances upon each other. Do each of you think that today a single branch of government has gained too much power?
President Jefferson. Each of the 3 branches of government are trying to gain power. That has been going on since the founding of the country. Today, I truly believe that the executive branch is exerting too much power. The Supreme Court is, I think, doing their best to look at what is taking place and to give honest evaluations of the law. But I'm even seeing individuals in the Supreme Court that have been placed there for not their great knowledge, but for political reasons and political expediency. I would say that today it is the executive branch that is exerting greater power, but in many instances that is because the legislative branch cannot cooperate enough to get anything done. President Madison. I believe that I agree with Thomas on this. When we were presidents, we were still feeling our way into what we could do, what powers we truly had, relationships between the courts and the legislative branch. Today, it appears as though if the legislatures say one thing and the president disagrees, the first thing they do is try to find a method of bypassing the will of the legislature. I think that branches, the 3 branches, truly do need equal powers. I think that the will of the executive branch should be offset by the will of the legislative branch. And if the people of the country see fit to give the same party powers of both legislative branches and the executive branch, that the Supreme Court is the last obstacle to the 2 branches violating the Constitution. I believe that we laid the proper foundation. But today I think that many lawyers attempt to bypass the checks and balances that we thought about. Justice Scalia. I don't think there is any doubt that the executive branch is attempting to bypass much of what is in the Constitution. You're seeing a time that minorities are enforcing their will over the majorities. It has been said in the past that a vociferous minority can control the majority, and we are seeing that more and more today. Every time that a branch of government tries to bypass the concepts of the Constitution, you are seeing an attempt to destroy the foundation of the country. Justices today that believe the Constitution should be a living document that reflects the changing conditions in the world today are trying to follow a concept where the minority has the ability to overrun the majority. The neutrality of the Supreme Court is something that has to be absolutely guarded. The fact that a president would threaten to add members of a specific party to the Supreme Court because they do not like a decision is extremely dangerous for the country. The people do not really have much to say about what justices are selected, other than the fact that they have elected the president that gets to make the decision of who is recommended, and the legislative body approves. Tradition has always been that if a executive chooses an individual for the Supreme Court, that the legislative bodies would approve. Today you are seeing political battles over individuals that are appointed to the courts. The will of the people should be upheld. That is an underlying concept that should never, ever change for our country.
Do you think, excuse me, do you think that any legislation is required to assure equality between the branches of the government in the future?
President Jefferson. I'm not sure what legislation could assure equality. You see, all things are in the hands of the people. If the people send the proper representatives to government, then they should respect the concept of equality in branches, and additional legislation should not be required. Perhaps the area of executive action on the part of the president should be addressed through a type of legislation. But I think that that type of legislation would just simply be changed as the parties change. President Madison. The concept of equality of branches of government is absolutely instrumental to the future of the country. I'm not sure either just how we should approach a type of legislation that would additionally assure these equalities. Perhaps legislation that defines the maximum number of members of the Supreme Court would help assure that the powers of the Supreme Court would not be diluted through political appointment. That would perhaps be the only thing that enters my mind at this time. Justice Scalia. I devoted a lifetime into trying to do what was best for the country. My concept of what was best was to follow the Constitution. The Constitution does not address the number of members of the Supreme Court. So perhaps I think that Mr. Madison is correct, that a law should be enacted that defines the current number of members of the court. This number of members has worked well through many years, and I think that the more representations you would put on the court, the more that you would find the opportunity for political pressures. The system has worked well for many years, and I think that one change would perhaps do a lot to assure that the equality remains into the future. Presidents from both parties are taking advantage of the concept of executive orders. I think that wise legislation could limit the areas of which a president could use an executive order. A good area for that would be a clear definition of laws concerning immigration. The legislative body, the House and the Senate, should bear the burden of clearly defining what the immigration policy of the country should be and pass laws accordingly. A president should not be able to change something as important as immigration laws through executive order. So that would be one area where I recommend that legislative action should be taken.
Now that you're on the other side, what do each of you think is the greatest risk to the United States today?
President Jefferson. The country is faced with multiple great risks. There are countries that hate us. There are countries that would attack us if they thought they could win. We must maintain a strong military. And we must do what we can to assure that democratic countries in the world are united militarily to assure that they will outlast the oligarchs and those that prefer autocratic rule. The national debt is a disaster. We've already discussed that. If the debt is not brought under control, there will be a time within a generation that the country will be bankrupt. But I think that those are the two greatest dangers. President Madison. I believe that one of the greatest dangers to the country is the fact that the political parties cannot cooperate and establish effective government. If the parties were to cooperate and do what was best for the people, all of the great problems that the country faces could be solved. If they cooperate, they can solve the problem of military safety for the citizens. They can solve the problems of the national debt. They can solve the problem of insolvency of Social Security. They can solve basically all the problems that face the country. What they must do is learn to cooperate. Justice Scalia. I think that what my friends here have said is absolutely true. In my mind, the greatest danger is the growing national debt. But I also fear that one of the greatest dangers is the ability of powerful and rich individuals to influence the political parties and through those influences to overcome what is best for the common person. The Constitution is intended to create a great equality, but it never conceived of the fact that there would be individuals that have greater wealth than many countries. If these people want to take advantage, and there are those that certainly do want to do that, and I could even name a few, but I won't, there has to be controls onto how much money and influence they can use on our politicians. I think that external influences like that has the potential to be our greatest danger.
Okay, Justice Scalia, you kind of jumped into my next question there. There are families, individuals, as you said, that control incredible wealth and political power. Do the three of you see any way these people can be controlled so their power does not interfere with individual freedoms while protecting their individual rights?
Jefferson. When we founded the country, there were individuals that had much greater wealth than others. And they also were the ones that were educated. In spite of the abilities of these people, and I must admit I was one of them, in spite of the abilities of these people to exert great influence, we came up with a type of government that clearly has operated for hundreds of years. Today, we are seeing people, individuals, and countries that are willing to do whatever they must in order to gain influence and power. I think that we are at a point that there must be limitations placed on how much money individuals can spend in running for public office, and that those funds should be generated and paid by the government. If each individual was placed on a level playing field financially, then I think that the people would have a better ability to hear the truth. They would certainly hear less lies. And I think that the political structure would be strengthened. Mr. Madison. I also agree that there has to be some type of limitation placed on the amount of money that an individual should be able to use to influence a politician. The enactment of such a law would be in violation of certain rights that are in the Constitution. But I think that if some type of limit isn't placed on the powers that lobbyists, rich people exert on the government, that it would be almost impossible to find equality in the future. Justice Scalia. I know that the Founding Fathers never conceived of the fact that individuals would be able to spend tens of millions of dollars towards a political campaign of an individual politician. They never comprehended that as much as $1 trillion could be spent on a presidential campaign. These are dollars that, in my mind, could be put to far better use. However, when you limit how much money an individual can put to a candidate, you are affecting the rights of that individual to do as they see fit. It can be a catch-22. You're always trying to weigh the rights of an individual versus what they can do to influence the rights of others. I do believe there have to be additional limitations placed. I'm not sure what you can do to affect what lobbyists can do today. They are extremely powerful and have incredible influence over the politicians. Something must be done. An individual that makes minimum wage has the same rights as an individual that makes $1 billion a year. How you justify the great equality that in the Constitution and make it work is certainly a question that must be addressed in the future.
Okay, there are a lot of important lessons to be learned from history, but what do each of you consider the most important lesson that we can learn from history?
President Jefferson. All of the great civilizations have failed because of greed and power by its leadership. As individuals seek personal powers and no longer do what is right for the individual members of the culture or civilization, then those that are being abused rise up and take action against the leaders. A great lesson that has to be learned from history is that political leaders must do what is best for the people of the country. When the leadership only believes in personal power, personal greed, personal wealth, and abuses the members of that country, then that country will cease to exist in the long run. President Madison. What Thomas just said is highly accurate, but I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently. When the leadership of a country takes the rights away from the individuals that live in that country, then those individuals will rise up and the country will cease to exist. We stated in our documents that all men are created equal. There are many that do not believe that fact. There are many that believe that they are so much better than others. They go into political office simply to gain power and wealth. When those people start to take away the rights of the common person, then those people become so dissatisfied that they will no longer respect government and they will no longer follow the rules of government. And if those rules are taking advantage of those people, that government will truly cease to exist. Justice Scalia. There are so many lessons of history that should be learned and understood. One important lesson to learn is that if a company or country aggressively attacks another and another, that many countries will join together to stop the aggression, and that a war will take place, and that one of the countries in that war will cease to exist. A country needs to live in peace. That is a lesson of history. If a country cannot learn to coexist, then there will be others that will react against it negatively. Today, there are so many ways that countries can act negatively towards each other. They can do it through warfare, through trade, through their economy, through taking tariffs against countries, economic sanctions. There are so many ways. The key lesson in history that we have to learn is to do what is right, to show common sense, and to follow the foundation of the Constitution that has laid down a direction that has lasted for hundreds of years. The further we vary from the path of the Founding Fathers, the more we will increase the chances that our country will no longer exist.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us again. I wish you were all in physical bodies so we could put you in office again. Would each of you like to make a closing statement for us?
We're going to start with Justice Scalia. Thank you so much for allowing us to give our opinions. Our Constitution is the greatest document that was ever written. These gentlemen that I'm with laid a foundation that has built the greatest country in the world and has been the path that millions of people have followed. It has built the greatest country in the world. Now, the lesson of history that should be learned is that when a document works so well, it should not be ignored and changed. It should be tweaked. Yes, there are amendments that should probably be added to the Constitution. But you should never allow minorities that speak against the rights of others, that speak of violence, that seek to overthrow the government. You should never allow those minorities to exert influence and control over those in leadership that have common sense and level heads. Coexistence with all is required. That is required within the country. Individuals with great wealth must help others. Individuals that are struggling must not try to overthrow the government to have what others have, but they must work with the government. They must work with their families, with others. They must do what they need to rise up and to be successful. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak. It's always a pleasure. And as you know, I always have very few opinions on subjects. Goodbye. President Jefferson. We did our best to create a perfect union. We made mistakes. We followed paths that have led to difficulties in future times, but we did our best. The concept that all men are created equal is essential to the United States and the democracies of the world to existing. The simple concept of the golden rule, followed by countries, would do a lot in order to preserve the future. Countries must learn to coexist and get along. Countries must learn to help each other. They must learn to aid those that are underdeveloped. They must educate. They must show that education is the greatest thing for leading to prosperity. They must do what is required to help others, and they must help themselves. Voters of the United States must understand that they must take control of their leaders. So thank you for allowing me to come through once more. I would be happy to return if asked. President Madison. We felt that a strong central government was required. Today, your politicians have shown that a strong central government has the ability to take advantage of those that need help, to those that lead the lives that are the economic engine for the country. Huge governments lead to bureaucracies, and bureaucracies lead to inefficiencies. I never conceived of what is taking place today. In our time, things were much more simple. In our time, we only had 3 or 4 million people in the country. We could work with those people, we could understand them, and we could try to preserve the rights of the states. We could do many things with a larger and stronger government. We could defend it, we could have commerce, we could do the many things that were required. Hopefully the politicians today will learn some of the lessons that if they studied what we did in the past, would certainly help them. So thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity. This was the first time that I've been on your show and given the ability to speak, and I certainly appreciate it. Okay. Thank you so much. That concludes our 2-part series. The information given by these 3 spirits over the past 2 weeks has been incredibly enlightening. I hope our listeners will tell their friends about the important messages. Our country is in trouble and must learn the lessons of the past from these amazing spirits.
Agreed. Our latest podcast is called Hello Heaven. We broadcast it on YouTube and Facebook Live Fridays at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. On this show, we try to interview listeners who have had supernatural events happen to them. If you check out our last show, you'll find out that Barry and I spoke of our own personal supernatural events, including some miracles. Check it out. I think you might enjoy it.
Okay. Thank you so much for listening to us tonight. I wanted to channel as long as we could, so we're going to skip the mentioning of my book and a few other things. Thank you so much for listening to us. We hope you enjoyed the show tonight, and we hope you pay attention to a lot of the opinions that you heard. Thank you for listening. Please join us Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the ParaX Radio Network.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.